Hello, everybody. My name is Pedro De Bruyckere. I'm an educational scientist and teacher trainer in Ghent, Belgium. I'm also a scientist at the University of Layden in the Netherlands. And for the past 3 weeks, I also was involved in helping the government here in Flanders to prepare education post-corona. If you have any complaints about me, do mention me on Twitter. With your complaint, but you can also put questions in the Q&A. My slides will be on theeconomymeaning.com later today. And most of the time, I'm just a boring myth buster in education. I co-wrote 2 books with Paul Kirchner and Kasper Hulshoff about urban myths about learning and education, but I won't be discussing this today. Today, I'll be discussing education during and after Corona. Now, for the people who have seen talks by me for the past few years, you might expect that I'll have some funny jokes and some laughs in it. But I've given some webinars already lately, and it feels very strange. If you tell a joke and nobody reacts, then I tried to use some laughing that was on my cell phone, but that's not really the same thing. And the topic is a bit serious, so don't be disappointed if there are no jokes today. Also, sorry for my English. It's Flenglish. It's a combination of Flemish and English. What I want to discuss today is 4 things. First of all, I want to explore what is the impact of the Corona crisis on education. Then I need to discuss gap thinking. And you will be surprised that I will try to explain that the gap doesn't exist, but something worse does. Then what can we do now to tackle the situation for our children? And most important, what to do next. I hope you all like those 4 elements because I can't change them anymore. So let's start with what is the impact of this Corona crisis on education and our children. First of all, it's very hard to predict because we haven't had a situation like this in the latest decades. So what we all try to do is try to look at things that are similar and try to, well, get predictions based on similar situations. And most of the time, then we have 3 different kinds of situations that look similar to the current situation. Then we are discussing about summer loss, strikes in schools, and earthquakes and floods. Let's have a closer look. A study that was published this week looked at the summer loss research and extrapolated the findings of summer loss to the current situation. And they predict that there will be a 50% loss for mathematics and a 30% loss for reading compared with where you left your children. This sounds huge. And one of the recommendations of the scientists is let's focus when the children come back on mathematics. But it's not that simple. Why isn't this the case? Summer loss, well, if you look at the research, most of the studies were performed in the United States. And there is a clear situation of summer loss. And on average, the summer loss, if you look at John Hattie's work, the most recent data says minus 0.02. But that's an average. And in those studies, those American studies mainly, you will see that there's a close relation between social economic status, SES, and the amount of summer loss. If you're from a rich background, actually the learning effect of a summer holiday can be positive. While for children from a poor background, the summer loss can be much bigger. But if you look more closely in other countries, for instance, some studies in the Netherlands have shown that this is not the case, that those differences based on background don't play that big role in the Netherlands. So it's not that simple. Another option, let's have a look what the effects are of strikes. There have been strikes in several countries for the past decades. For instance, in Belgium, we had a big strike in the 90s of previous century, where the schools in the French-speaking part were closed for months. We had also for instance, in Canada, Ontario, Argentina also had big school strikes. And research on the effects of those strikes, well, they are very depressing, because for instance, below, one of the researchers that looked at the effect of strikes in Belgium showed that they could see the consequences for the children even years later. There were more children who had to redo a year and who were less performing even 4 or 5 years after the school strikes. But while this sounds very depressing, both in summer loss and summer holidays and in strikes, there is no education, no formal education for the children. But that's not the case in many countries today, because in many countries, teachers are working day and night to make it possible to teach online. So saying that it's the same and that it will have the same effect as summer holidays or strikes, I think this is incorrect. The third example that often is looked at is the effect of earthquakes and floods. And this is something that John Hattie did the past 2 weeks. And he looked at the effect of, for instance, Christchurch earthquake or the flooding in New Orleans. And his conclusion is that there weren't any negative consequences, no bad consequences at all. And a lot of people have shared this text by John Hattie, but they overlooked one very important element. There was no effect on average. And that average, this is something that is much more important to have a closer look to. So I need to discuss our gap thinking. Don't run away, don't get mad at me straight away, but there is no gap. There is something much worse. This is something that I base on Hans Rösling, the scientist who died a couple of years ago, who left us great work. And he explains that when we use the metaphor of a gap, we often, suggest that there is a group over here, and there is another group over here, and there is nothing in between. But that's not the case. Most of the time, the majority of the children are in between those two groups. And stating that there's a gap is not representing the actual situation. Now, what is happening is something else. For the past few weeks, 2 months, we have heard a lot of pleas to flatten the curve. And luckily, in most countries, sadly enough, not in all of them, but in most countries, this has been the case, which is great. It was the main reason why we are still in lockdown. But I'm afraid that the corona crisis has also been flattening the educational curve. I have to explain this. If you look at this, this is also a bell curve, and bell curve, that's just a normal distribution. And if the bell curve is very high, not flat at all, it means that there are not that much differences between children. If the curve is flattened, it means that there are a lot of differences between children. Now, this might sound bizarre, that there is a curve is not really an issue. Even the shape is not that much an issue. Imagine this, bear with me. Imagine that every single child is raised in the best possible environment. Healthy parents, enough money, the best teachers in the world, you. There would still be a curve. But that curve would be fair. I think that's the big issue today, is that for a lot of children, the situation is not fair at all. And for me, the question to tackle is, what are the causes for this unfairness? So at this time, the curve is flattened, and where you are positioned as a child in this curve is not based on fair causes. Well, one of the first causes I need to discuss is stress. And this is something that worries me a lot. No, really. I've seen in a lot of countries that the amount of children who have more depressive feelings has been tripled or even worse. We've seen that a lot of children can't play. A lot of children are locked up today. I've heard that in Spain, finally, after weeks of lockdown, a very strict lockdown, children will be allowed to go out. In our country here in Belgium, our children aren't allowed to play outside. They can walk, they can bike a bit, and since a couple of weeks, they can skate and step again, but they can't reach out to their friends, they can't play together with their friends, they can't see their families. This delivers a lot of stress. But there is even something more happening, and this is called toxic stress. I'm afraid that I will depress you even more, but toxic stress is the stress you get because other people are stressed. And what we see nowadays is that a lot of parents are stressed. And I'm not only talking about those parents trying to combine working at home with teaching their children at home. But what I've seen is that what we see in data is that, for instance, a lot of reports are happening about violence in families. We've seen that a lot of children are being abused more often than in regular times. And we've seen that a lot of parents are afraid about losing their jobs. And all of this adds also to the stress. And too much stress, for sure, negative stress, can hinder learning. And more important, it's incredibly sad for the children. When we are talking about the gap, most of the time we are talking about inequality. And of course, inequality is a huge, huge problem. And the biggest chance is that inequality will rise because of the corona crisis. There was a study published yesterday. I want to be as relevant and up to date as possible. This is a study performed in the Netherlands by Thijs Bol. And he examined what is the situation for the families and related this to the income, to how wealthy or how low SES a family was. And what we've seen is that, for instance, if you look at the ability to use a computer, yes, of course, this is related to your family situation. If you have your own workspace, if you have your own bedroom, it's much more easy to work for school than if you have to sit together with all your brothers and sisters and your family in a smaller amount of rooms. If you don't have a computer, it becomes very hard to work for school. Luckily, what I've seen in many countries is that teachers not only aim at computers, but that they combine paper and mobile technology. A lot of teachers in my own city have become kind of post officers, sending out or bringing little bundles of working papers to hard to reach children so they could work at home. But like, it's even going much further. What we've also seen is that there is a big link between the amount of help children get and the home situation. What we see, and it's not that illogical, but still it helps raise inequality, is that parents who have a bigger income, but also who have had a bigger education, a longer education, who are higher educated, they are much better in helping the children how to learn. And we see that this also could have a huge influence on the situation after Corona. I have to move the slide for a minute. But it's not all bad news. And this is something that is great for what the schools are doing in the Netherlands, and I hope it's the case in many other countries, is that we do see that families with lower SES have more contact in general with schools. And this is interesting because this means that schools are really reaching out for those families, and they won't succeed for every single family, every single child. For instance, I know that in our country, in our main cities, for instance, in Belgium, some schools haven't reached 20 to 30% of the students for the past 7 weeks, while trying to do their best to reach out to them. Also, something very interesting from the study that was published yesterday is that parents seem to help daughters more than boys. And this is interesting. Again, quite often people are discussing a gender gap in education, and also this is not really a gap because you still have boys doing their best, and we are still also losing girls in education. But also here you see that more often daughters are helped with education than boys in this current situation. Is this because boys don't want help and girls are more open for it? Is this because parents think daughters need more help? We don't know, but it's something to have a look at later on when we don't have to fight this crisis anymore. Enough background. What to do now? Well, a couple of words to help. First of all, observe. And what is the biggest benefit of being together in one classroom is that you can see the reactions of a child. You can see the non-verbal cues. You can see if somebody's okay or not. And nowadays, it's very difficult to track reactions or the situation of a child. And this is something that I've been told by a couple of teachers, well, quite a lot of teachers. For instance, I learned a sad example of a teacher who is teaching online his class, and he noticed that one of his pupils was acting differently than the child would do in a regular classroom. The child was more quiet, more passive, and the teacher was worried. So he made a personal chat for the child, and they had a personal one-on-one communication, and things were not that good in that family. I'm really glad that teacher did this, because now the child and the family are helped through the school and through the community. So observe. And while we often observe, we relate observing to what's happening learning-wise, I think nowadays it's also very important to observe in other situations and give also the opportunity for children to be consoled by you, but also by each other. A lot of schools nowadays don't only organize classes online to learn, but also to meet each other, to have fun moments together, but also to share stories with each other. And I think, you know, quite often schools and classrooms can be safe havens, and we shouldn't forget this. Then a thing that most of you have been doing for quite a while already is select. We can't achieve all the goals we would achieve in education in a normal period. Forget it. When there's a crisis, we have to select. Some people argue we shouldn't teach anymore. We should only aim on consoling and emotional well-being. I don't agree, because the connection between learning and well-being is very complex. Sometimes you don't have to feel good to learn, but learning can help you to feel good. Sometimes it can give you even a kind of escape of the situation. But I agree, if you're very stressed, it doesn't, well, learning will be much more difficult. And for sure, not everything that you learn will make you feel good. If your girlfriend leaves you, maybe you've learned something, but you will hate it. But feeling great doesn't help learning either by definition. Sometimes you can feel so good that you say, you know what, forget school, I'm feeling great, bye. So if you only focus on well-being, maybe you are losing a tool for that well-being, but also the effect could be huge later on. And I don't want to bring despair, but we don't know how long this crisis will last. Later, but more about that. And the last word I want to give that you can do right now is monitor. Monitor the learning. And I stole this from Dominique Sluismans. I go a bit out of the way of the slide. Most of the time we are discussing evaluation, we are thinking about formal evaluation or formative assessment to look where students are in the learning process. But we have to be very rational with the amount of time our children have and we have. So what Dominique suggests is that today evaluation is a kind of confetti. All the dots on the screen are little data points. We have very formal evaluation moments, but we also have a lot of informal data points. A child saying to you in class, in your online class, a correct answer. Maybe it has learned it is already, and maybe you shouldn't check it afterwards. Or a lot of children are doing exercise online. This is also information for you. It helps you to shape a picture where the students are, where the pupils are in their learning process. So maybe for some children, you already know this child is ready with this topic. This child has achieved those goals. Maybe then you shouldn't bother it afterwards with formal evaluation that much. Now, what to do next? Well, first of all, when schools reopen, and we have reopening of schools in the Netherlands May 11th, also in France. Schools have opened in Denmark 1 week and a half ago. Germany just postponed the opening of the schools. We see a very diverse approach. We see very diverse approaches in many countries. But there's one thing you have to bear in mind when schools reopen: not everybody will come back to school. You will have 3 groups of pupils. You will have one group of students and pupils who will come back and who will learn in a not that comfortable situation, because school will look much different than normal schools. The second group are students and pupils who can't come because maybe they are sick themselves, maybe they are in quarantine, but also maybe they are living in a family where one of the people is sick or in quarantine, or maybe the parents, their brothers or sisters, or themselves are a part of a group who are of high risk of getting corona. So this second group will need online education even when the schools reopen. The third group is a very different group. They won't be in school, but the main reason is because they were afraid. And the OECD has stated in a report that we shouldn't force children to come to school because their parents are afraid. Now, I do think it's very important that schools or communities reach out to those families to support them, to show them how safe education is when the schools are reopened. But it will be a bigger group in some areas, and some data suggest that there is a relation between that third group and, again, inequality. So that's why it's very important to reach out to those families. And what do you need to do next? Well, again, the same 4 words: observe, console, select, monitor. But don't make a mistake. Don't make the mistake thinking that this is a kind of sequence, because you can't start with consoling and then, okay, everybody's ready, everybody's fine, move on. You have to observe, you will have to console, you'll have to select, because sometimes you will notice that some of the goals you selected aren't possible to achieve because you don't have enough time to work on it, or because children need more time for other stuff. But there is something more again. I think the most important thing to do next, but I would suggest to do it already today, start with it today, is take care of yourself. Remember when you are flying, you know, that time when people were allowed to go on planes, to go to other countries? Bizarre, we have done this, trust me. When you were in a plane and you got that video that nobody watches about safety measures, yeah, that video, yeah, you know, then there was always the same message. First, take care of yourself, and then take care of your children. And how egoistic it sounds, maybe today that's also important to take into the mind, into the back of your mind when preparing school and working for school. Quite a lot of teachers and principals have told me for the past few weeks that a lot of teachers are close to a burnout. While I know that some teachers are not working that hard, but that's a real minority, trust me. Most of teachers are working even harder today than they worked before. And it's different with people in the NHS or in hospitals, because they are working really hard and they are risking their own lives. That's something we don't do yet in education, but we work really hard too. And if you are close to burnout, and if there is a situation that you won't be able to work anymore because you're out of energy, you won't be able to help your children, your pupils. So first of all, please also take care of yourself, because we're running a marathon and not a sprint. And we don't know how long this marathon will be. In a lot of countries, the schools will reopen this school year, this academic year. But I already know that there is a slim chance that things will be back to normal next year, next academic year, or next school year. Some virologists are pretty sure that there will be new lockdowns in October or November. So I think it's good that a lot of countries don't skip summer holiday, because we'll need it. Our children will need it, our teachers will need it, even our parents will need it. But we will, as an education, we will need it also to prepare a very bizarre new year, a new school year, because we will need to help children cope with the loss they received. We will be confronted with a lot of differences between children, based on equality, based on stress, based on sickness, based on a lot of factors, even based sometimes on gender. And we will need to help them. But at the same time, there will be probably new closures of schools. And so we need our rest, but we will also need our time the coming months to prepare this, because the big thing we've had for the past 2 months, we had to do everything without preparation. It sounds a bit ironic, but the only thing we now have as a benefit is that we can prepare for next year, for a very special year. So take care of yourself, and by doing this, you will be able to help a lot of children. And I really hope you'll be able to see your pupils and students pretty soon, healthy, in the same room, and everything that just happened will be like a bad dream. Thank you for listening. Okay, this was the explanation that I prepared, the presentation I prepared, and I see there are already a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'll move to the Q&A now. Okay, some answers are already gone. Some people are not familiar with social economic status. I give a short explanation about that. When you only look at the money people earn, the income, the economic element, you will be losing a lot of elements that also have an influence on what's happening in a family or what's happening for children. For instance, teachers in most countries, sadly enough, don't have a high income, but they have a big social background, and this can compensate for the economical, well, lower income. Second element. Could we have further details on the research mentioned, especially the study released yesterday? Oh, well, Thijs Bol has checked with a panel of families in the Netherlands that was already a regular panel used for research, and he was checking on how, for the past 7 weeks, how education was going in those families in the Netherlands. I will put a link to the whole paper. It's freely available on my website. I'll share it also with people from researchED, so you can read all about it over there. Do bear in mind, I do think that there will be huge regional differences, because I know that educational systems can be very different, and comparing educational systems can be very complex. And I do hope it's the same situation in many countries, because I really like the element that families of parents from lower social economic backgrounds are reaching out more to schools than families with a higher social economic background. I hope this is the case in many countries, but I can't tell this for sure. I hope similar research is being performed in many countries. About the slides accompanying my talk, this is a little trick I've done. If you want to know how I've done this, I've changed the background. So I've made 42 versions of my background, including my slides. It looks spectacular, I thought myself, but it's very simple actually. So there's no PowerPoint used in this presentation during the presentation, only in the preparation. A very good question by Alice Layden. Do you have advice for teachers starting this first year in September, going into year one and feeling overwhelmed? I agree. I think this will be very special. I'm a teacher trainer myself, and a piece of advice I want to give to school leaders. I think there should be a talk for school leaders during this course, this run of researchEDHome, because school leaders will have an almost impossible but crucial job to get the right people doing the right job. Let me explain. I think we will have a couple of different groups of teachers. We will have older teachers who are actually afraid to go back to school. We will have younger teachers with experience who are able to work in schools. And we will have new teachers, and in many countries, even teachers in teacher training are helping out the schools even today without finishing their training. Now, first of all, those older teachers who are afraid, if you listen to my story, I think they shouldn't come to school by definition. Maybe you can use those older teachers to help the children who can't come to school themselves, because there still will be online learning, and a lot of online learning. Now, younger teachers or teachers in teachers to be, students in teacher education, I think they can play a very important role, but they shouldn't be in charge of new classes. The best thing if you have enough people, because I know there are a lot of teacher shortages, the most experienced teachers should work with those students and pupils who need help the most. And in the meantime, the new teachers and even teachers starting in the first year in September should help the students who are not having a big learning backlash or learning loss. A mistake we often make in education is that we give special help to the children who need extra education, but most of the time it's done by somebody else than their own teacher. For learning disabilities, this is perfect. This is okay because not every teacher has this background. But if it's because they didn't understand something that well, why don't we let them have the person who knows them best and who has most experience explaining it to them? So maybe have a very clear look where to use or where to put which teacher. And feeling overwhelmed, maybe one element of consolation is that most of the teachers who start their first year in September are overwhelmed by definition. Well, that was a depressing answer. But the good thing is after 2-3 years, well, you'll be surprised you survived and you have become a real teacher. Well, you're already a real teacher, but you'll become a really good teacher, even better than at the start. Next question. It's written in Dutch, but I'll translate. It's close to what I've been saying already. Can we ask students to help with online education? I do think so, in a couple of ways. First of all, if you are discussing students in teacher training, I just explained how you can use them. But a second way, if you can use your own students and own pupils for education and online education in a way that they learn a lot from it. For instance, we know that for learning, this is a study that Dan Willingham published with some colleagues in 2013, coming up with their own questions about the topics they are studying can really help. So, for instance, asking your students to make a Kahoot quiz themselves about a topic you've been teaching and sharing this Kahoot quiz with their other students, this will help each other to learn. This is a small example that you can do. Also, for instance, what you also can do in online education is you give a task to your students. They work on it first individually, and then you'll ask them to have a kind of peer assessment through WhatsApp or Zoom or Skype or whatever. And afterwards, you'll have a collective moment with everybody together in the classroom, the online classroom. We also know that your students will benefit from this. Helen says, thank you so much, practical, but also uplifting. Well, I was afraid it would have been too depressing. What would you advise about managing virtual classrooms and their pros and cons? I think, first of all, looking at the situation of many pupils, try to have a couple of synchronous moments that everybody is online at the same time, but do limit the amount of those moments. Have enough possibilities to work asynchronous. Why is this? Imagine having a family with 3 children and 2 parents who both parents need to work online and they have 2 computers. This is hell for them. So if you force them with a strict schedule for all the students, then it gets impossible for that family to survive this kind of schedule. I think it's very important that if you have virtual meetings, make enough use of mobile technology. Don't think computer first. Then if you're looking at classes, a good thing to look at is have an instructional moment. This can be by a video or by an online session. Then let the children work on their own. Have, for instance, then afterwards some peer moments with 2 or 3 in small groups, and then have a classical moment where you can put everything together. And this can be spread over a longer period. So be very careful with how you plan virtual classrooms. Now, everything has pros and cons. In what I've just explained, for instance, with a lot of asynchronous moments, it's much more difficult to observe what's happening in those classrooms or in what's happening with those children. So that's why I do plead to have still enough synchronous moments. Okay, I could go much more deeper into that, but Paul Kirchner is doing a talk at in 2 hours time. Do ask him because he will tell you much more about this too. Steven Vermeijden asks me, Pedro, what do you think about exams at the end of the school year? Do or don't? Well, the typical answer for this is, it depends. I'll try to explain. Like I just show you in my presentation, I'll retake, yes. Remember the slide that I showed you? We need enough input to know if a child is ready or not to go to the next year, or if it needs extra help, or maybe summer school. There are a lot of options. Now, the thing is, an exam is a way of formal evaluation. And sometimes it can be a very, very effective and even more efficient way of evaluating, because an exam is something you do in a very short bracket of time, and afterwards you have a result. I do think most of the time in schools, when schools reopen, should go to learning and being together for many different reasons. At the end of the road, if you have a feeling as a teacher or as a team that you are missing some of those data points, in that case, maybe an exam can be a solution to have a perfect image of what children are needing, what children need. If you have the feeling that you have enough data points, well, skip the exam. It's a bit more complicated answer, sorry for that. And I think we don't need too many exams, but I wouldn't be too strict to say we don't need exams at all. But a good question. Bert asked me a question, do you think we should give exams to test if pupils are ready to go to the next year? It's almost the same question. I do think I want to add something. And that's something that should come after this question. Let me explain. In education, we always think or not always, but most of the time, we think about remedial approach. We teach children something, and then we check if they understood everything, and then the pupils who didn't understand what was taught, we take them in a separate group and we give them remedial training. Okay, but it's better safe than sorry, and maybe it's more interesting to look at what do the children need next year, and teach them in a kind of pre-teaching way those elements that they will need to be able to participate next year. And I think this is a very more interesting approach to what's happening right now, and more a kind of pre-teaching way of looking at what children need. So I do think we should be able to tell which kind of elements our children need for next year, and pinpointing and helping those children to achieve those elements. And maybe some of the stuff that we really think is important, they won't need next year or the year after. And that's then something that you have to let go. Sometimes you have to kill your babies. Sorry for that. Ruth Griffiths, next question. We have been preparing a reintegration curriculum for children. Good for you. We had planned to focus on team building, socialization, and mental well-being for the first 3 weeks before returning to core subjects and more normal school lesson routines. Given what you have said, would you be suggesting returning to some of this usual lesson routine earlier than this? Yes, mix, and don't quit team building and socialization and mental well-being after 3 weeks. I think it's more important to have an integration of everything during the whole period. But bear in mind, there are several reasons to do this. One is the reason I just explained about well-being and the difficult relation between well-being and learning, but there are some more reasons. Some children really want to go back to school because they're afraid themselves that they are lagging behind. And if then they are coming back to school and first they are glad to see everybody, but then they have the feeling that they have to wait for 3 weeks to learn something, they will get demotivated. So I think it's much more interesting to have a good mix. And I say mix, not only learning, okay? Collins, I don't know the first name. Could you explain a bit more about what you mean by 50% loss for maths and 30% loss for reading? Is that loss of knowledge learned in the last academic year? Well, it's a comparison with where you left your children and what they remember when they come back after this long period of being not in school. And that's what the scientists described in their study. And that's why I'm a bit reluctant to say it will be that huge. For some of your children, this will be the case because they didn't have any education at all for the last 7 weeks or months, 2-3 months, depending on which region you are. And if they don't have any form of education for the past few weeks or months, then this could be the case. But again, a lot of children did get education. Now, maybe you are wondering what's the explanation why the loss for reading is much less than the loss for mathematics. It's not that hard to explain because children do read, even if it's in a game or if they are reading a magazine or a text message, they are still reading, they still have some practice. For mathematics, well, mathematics are not used that much in daily life. Well, the mathematics they are being taught, and that's probably the reason why the loss for mathematics is much bigger. If schools begin the academic year online, some schools have talked about having the same teacher move up with their current classes. Is this something you would recommend? Wow, that's a good question. It depends. I'll try to, what I would think crucial today is that even if it's only for a day or only a half a day, to reopen the school in the safest way for every single class before summer holiday, to give the children an opportunity to have a kind of closure. I think that's key, that the children are able to see each other in real life again, to discuss house life, to see their teacher again. And I think that's more important than having the same teacher moving up, because I think it's also relevant to see if that teacher is the best teacher for that year. Maybe he or she has been teaching the current year, the current group for a couple of years, has lots of experience, and is the best teacher for teaching those topics. So it depends. I think it's more important to have a moment of closure still this academic year. Okay, Eric. I do my last internship to become a teacher from the 18th of May. What can be my role? How should schools go on with internships this year? I've seen that there are a lot of differences between schools and institutes. I think that, first of all, a lot of teachers nowadays, or teachers in internship, are helping with online materials. Very interesting element. I've also seen teachers being online buddies for children to help them in the current situation. I think that's also a very good thing. What I've just said, when schools reopen, working with the regular group, helping the regular teacher to focus on the children with extra needs, I think this could be a very good way to make use of you. I think those different elements can be relevant for your teacher training, and they all have their benefits, and most important, it could benefit the children. So those three different kinds of roles could be relevant. Should we offer to upskill parents, for instance, sharing maths, English, science subjects online if they would like to achieve their GSC to help them move up in the job market? Okay. This is a very different kind of question, and I do think that what I've seen from people looking at the job market, I do think it's interesting that parents who aren't able to work, that they have possibilities to learn new stuff online. But there is also an element of danger for the regular students and pupils. I have to explain this. We've seen from research on homework and parents helping with homework that they can have a negative effect on the study results of their children, for sure in mathematics. I have to explain this. If a child is having trouble with the homework, maths homework, and parents try to help the child, but they learned mathematics in a different way, they try to explain it differently to the child gets confused and learns less. And if we make parents too confident about their own knowledge, maybe children end up with being more confused. So most important thing that parents can do for the children in this time, in this crisis, is give them space to work for school. Be around so you can keep them on track, that they keep on working for school, but and also observe, and if something goes good, tell the teacher. If something doesn't work out that good, also tell the teacher. Give the teacher feedback. Be the eyes of the teacher is more important than helping your child yourself. So that's another element. But for sure, to upskill parents for themselves, I do think this can be a good idea. But that's not a topic, but it's a very good idea in my humble opinion. Okay, moving on. What about ongoing assessments, summative assessments, to monitor progress online? So some are in favor of open book assessments. Hogra is not a fan of open book, would rather encourage students to put themselves in low-stake test conditions and complete an online assessment to inform teacher judgment. Again, it depends. I do follow your opinion on low-stake testing, but again, it depends on what the situation is and what the goals are. Sometimes the goals you want to achieve is that they know stuff by heart, and then a closed book exam is needed. And sometimes it can be really easy to achieve even online by giving them a limited amount of time. At the same time, then it can be less fair to other students who think a bit slower while they do know their stuff. So everything has benefits and has pros and cons. So I think it depends. Sorry for this very soft answer, but it's the best I can do. Lime's right, thank you. Is there any other research you recommend for math teachers to look up that will inform their practice, given that students will lose so much of their math concepts skills during this lockdown? I won't answer this question straight away, but I will include an answer in my post on theeconomyofmeaning.com later today. Should we focus more on digital education these coming months, or must we focus all our energy on starting up the education at schools? You know what? A lot of teachers are afraid that they'll have to do double work. But if you have listened to the example I've given, it shouldn't be double work. And you can work on digital education and old-fashioned face-to-face education at the same time while preparing. Let me explain this. Give the example that I told you about, making a video or using an existing video for the instruction, followed by exercises, followed by peer tutoring or peer assessment, followed by a collective moment. Actually, this is something that you can also use in classroom without altering that much. Maybe you can even ask one of your students in classroom, you give them your cell phone, please film this instruction so I can share it with the students who can't be here. And at the same time, you have you have an online and offline version without too much work, because we have to be very careful how to use our time. So trying to be as practical and pragmatic as possible, I would say focus on both and see how both can benefit each other. For instance, some of the stuff that you do digitally, can you use in the classroom to keep children working while you are remedial teaching some of the other students or pre-teaching some of the other students? So I would say both. Okay, those were a lot of very interesting questions. Thank you very much. I hope you all liked what I've been saying, or that it was not that bad English. Oh, that was bad English. Well, I hope you liked it. See you soon, and please stay safe, keep healthy, and I hope to see you all in the flesh, in real life, very soon. Bye.
Thanks so much, Pedro. Pedro, I'm going to close down the meeting. There might be a few people that have gone to make a cup of tea. So we'll close down the meeting, and we'll get this uploaded to YouTube later on today, hopefully.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks again so much for giving your time today. I know you're exceptionally busy at the moment, but the amount of questions really show how much people were valuing your insights and thinking hard about the decisions, really tough decisions they're trying to make at the moment.
Yeah, true. And it's always, there is no best solution. And sometimes you will have to go for second or third best,
Yeah.
but it's the best possible thing we have today.
Yeah, really shows, you know, whenever we run anything like this, how much our educators care and how much they think about the decisions that they're making, and seek advice and look to experts like yourself. So thanks very much again.
Bye.
Take care.